Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're taking a deep dive into something that I think a lot of you can relate to. Learning English, and more specifically, how to learn it effectively. We're cracking open the scientific approach to learning the English language today. Our mission, should we choose to accept it, to equip you with the knowledge to really unlock fluency.
Sounds like a plan.
Yeah.
And it's a timely one, too, with all those Learn English in 30 days promises floating around online. And,
Oh, tell me about it. Is that even possible? Can you really go from zero to hero in a month?
well, it's tempting to believe, right? But honestly, from a cognitive science perspective, it's just not realistic for most people. Language learning, it's a complex process. Think about it. You're grappling with grammar,
Yeah.
memorizing vocabulary, refining your pronunciation, not to mention mastering those all-important listening and speaking skills. It's like rewiring your brain to think in a whole new way.
Yeah, it's like learning to play a musical instrument or even a sport, right? You can't just wake up one day and expect to be a concert pianist or a pro athlete.
Exactly. It takes time and dedicated practice. And honestly, that's what those quick fix solutions often miss. True fluency. It's about more than just memorizing a bunch of phrases. It's about being able to think in English, to dream in English, to really inhabit the language.
So no shortcuts then. But wait, you're saying there are scientifically proven methods that actually work. Tell me more.
Absolutely. And one of the most effective methods, research shows, is actually one of the most intuitive immersion. Think about how you learned your first language as a child.
Right. Just by being constantly surrounded by it, picking it up naturally.
Exactly. You were immersed in an environment where that language was all around you. And studies have shown that being in bilingual environments can actually speed up the learning process significantly. Your brain is wired to make sense of the world, and when it's constantly exposed to a new language, it starts to naturally pick up the patterns and make connections.
That's fascinating. But now for the million-dollar question. Most of us can't just pack our bags and move to, say, London or New York. So how do we recreate that immersive experience in our own lives without the plane ticket? Any tips?
That is the question, isn't it? And it's a good one. It's about getting a bit creative and finding ways to simulate immersion in your everyday life. And there are actually some really cool techniques for doing just that. One that comes to mind is spaced repetition. Have you heard of it?
Spaced repetition, spaced repetition. It rings a bell. I think I saw an app or two with that, but refresh my memory. How does it work?
So, picture this. You're trying to learn a whole bunch of new vocabulary words. You could try to cram them all in at once, but chances are you'll forget most of them pretty quickly. That's where spaced repetition comes in. It's all about strategically timing your review sessions to combat that pesky forgetting curve.
Ah, the forgetting curve, our old nemesis. So instead of just hoping for the best, I should be reviewing new words at specific intervals.
You got it. And the cool thing is, there are apps that actually do a lot of the heavy lifting for you. Think Anki or Memrise. They use algorithms based on spaced repetition to quiz you on vocabulary or grammar concepts right before you're about to forget them. It's like giving your brain a little nudge at just the right time to solidify those memories.
That's so clever. So we've got immersion, we've got spaced repetition. What else? What about actually using the language, speaking and writing?
Now you're talking. That's where active engagement takes center stage. It's not enough to just passively absorb information. You've got to put it into practice. Imagine trying to learn to play the piano by just reading sheet music.
Yeah.
Not very effective.
Not at all. You've got to actually put your fingers on those keys and make some music, even if it's a little off key at first.
Exactly. It's the same with language.
Yep.
Don't be afraid to make mistakes, to experiment, to just go for it. The more you actively use English, the more natural it will become. Instead of just memorizing verb conjugations, use them in sentences, have conversations, even if it's just with yourself in the mirror.
Okay, I'm starting to get the picture here. Immersion, spaced repetition, active engagement. These are like the pillars of effective language learning, am I right?
You're spot on. And they all work together too, which is pretty neat. But there's one more piece of the puzzle that I think is absolutely essential and maybe even the most challenging of all. Consistency.
Oh, consistency. That's a big one, isn't it? Because let's be real, learning a new language, it takes time and effort. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And sometimes it's hard to stay motivated. It really is. It's so easy to start with good intentions and then, life happens. But I'm curious, what's the science behind consistency? Why is it so crucial for learning, especially something as complex as a new language?
Well, think about it like this. Have you ever noticed how if you only work out once a month, you don't really see much progress? But those people who hit the gym consistently, even if it's just for a short time each day, they see those gains, right? Language learning is kind of similar. It's about building those neural pathways, strengthening those connections in your brain. And just like with physical training, consistent effort is what makes those changes stick.
Makes sense. So we're ditching the all-night cram sessions and embracing the power of, well, showing up regularly. But I have to ask, is cramming always bad? Like, sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do, right?
Of course, we've all been there. And hey, sometimes a last-minute cram session can help us remember things in a pinch. But for real, long-term learning, it's not the most effective strategy.
So it's like we're trying to fill up a leaky bucket, and cramming is like pouring a ton of water all at once, hoping some of it stays in.
You've got it.
Yeah.
It might work temporarily, but without consistent reinforcement, most of that knowledge just leaks out. It's about working smarter, not harder. And speaking of smarter, there's another cool technique that I think you'll find really interesting. Interleaving.
Interleaving. Now that one's new to me. Lay it on me. What's that all about?
It's all about mixing things up. Instead of focusing on one skill or topic for a long chunk of time, try switching between different tasks or subjects.
So instead of doing, say, an hour of vocabulary, then an hour of grammar, then an hour of listening, I should.
Exactly. Mix it up. Try doing, say, 20 minutes of each, then repeating the cycle. It's like cross-training for your brain.
Love that. Cross-training for my brain. Keeps things interesting, keeps me on my toes.
Exactly. Our brains, they thrive on novelty and variety. So when we interleave, we're essentially making our brains work a bit harder to retrieve and apply information. And that actually helps us learn and retain it better in the long run.
That's fascinating. It's like we're tricking our brains into learning more effectively. But, let's talk about the elephant in the room for a sec. Motivation.
Yeah.
How do we keep that fire lit, especially when things get tough or life throws curveballs our way?
You're hitting on a really important point. Motivation, it's the fuel that keeps our learning engine going.
Right.
And you're right, it can be a fickle friend sometimes. But the good news is there are definitely ways to cultivate it, to make it more of a habit than just, a happy accident.
Okay, I'm all ears. What are your secrets? How do we tap into that motivation superpower and keep it flowing?
Well, first things first, it's all about finding your WHY. Why are you learning English? What are your goals? Having a clear sense of purpose, it can be incredibly motivating, especially when you hit those inevitable bumps in the road.
So it's like if my why is strong enough, the how will follow.
Exactly. It's about connecting with those personal reasons for learning. Is it to travel the world?
Yeah.
To connect with new people and cultures? To advance your career? Whatever it is, write it down. Visualize it. Make it real.
I love that, having a vision board for language learning. But what about those days when, even with the best intentions, I'm just not feeling it? Those days when motivation just decides to take a vacation. What's your advice for those moments?
Oh, I'll have those days, believe me. And that's where a little strategy comes in handy. One of the simplest yet most effective things you can do is to set small, achievable goals. Instead of saying, I'm going to be fluent in English, try breaking it down. This week, I'm going to have a 5-minute conversation in English. Or today, I'm going to master the present perfect tense.
Mini goals for maximum motivation. It's less about overwhelming myself and more about celebrating those small victories along the way.
Exactly. And speaking of celebrations, don't forget to reward yourself. When you reach a goal, no matter how small, acknowledge it. Treat yourself to something you enjoy, whether it's a movie night, a delicious meal, a new book, whatever sparks joy for you.
Yes. Positive reinforcement for the win. It's amazing how motivating a little reward can be. But, life is busy. Work, family, that never-ending to-do list. Sometimes it feels like there just aren't enough hours in the day. Any tips for fitting language learning into our already jam-packed lives?
It's true. Life can feel like a juggling act sometimes. But here's the thing about language learning. It doesn't have to be this huge time commitment. You don't need to clear your schedule to make it happen. It's about finding those little pockets of time in your day and making them work for you.
Yeah, I like that. It's about, weaving English into the fabric of our lives, not treating it like this separate thing I have to make time for.
Exactly. Instead of saying, I don't have an hour to study today, ask yourself, where are those 5 or 10-minute windows where I could sneak in some English? Could be listening to a podcast on your commute, or maybe watching a quick English learning video while you're waiting for your coffee to brew. You can even just change your phone's language settings to English.
Those are great ideas. I'm already feeling less overwhelmed. It's about making those small moments count, and who knows, maybe those little English breaks will become something you look forward to.
Absolutely. And, while we're on the topic of looking forward to things, Remember to make it fun. Learning English shouldn't feel like a chore. Join an English conversation group, find a language exchange partner online, maybe even start an English language blog or social media account. The more you can immerse yourself in the language and find ways to make it enjoyable, the more motivated you'll be to keep going.
It's so true. When you're passionate about something, it doesn't feel like work. So it's
Yeah.
about finding those things that light us up, that make us genuinely excited to learn.
You got it. Remember, learning a language, it's a journey, not a race. So be patient with yourself, experiment, have fun with it, and figure out what works best for you. There's no one-size-fits-all approach.
This has been such an insightful conversation. We've covered so much ground today, from the science behind how our brains learn languages to practical tips for staying motivated and actually making those new skills stick. But before we wrap things up, I want to circle back to something you said earlier about finding your why. It's about more than just, memorizing grammar rules and vocabulary. It's about connecting with the world in a whole new way, isn't it?
That's exactly it. Learning English, it's about opening doors to new cultures, new perspectives, new possibilities. It's about bridging those communication gaps and connecting with people from all walks of life.
Right.
And that's something really special.
Beautifully said. So, as we wrap up this deep dive, what's one piece of advice you'd give to our listeners who are just starting their English learning adventure? What's the key to unlocking fluency and making it a lifelong passion, not just a passing phase?
Oh, that's easy. Embrace the journey. Learning a language, it's a marathon, not a sprint. There will be challenges, there will be setbacks, you might even have moments where you just want to throw in the towel. But trust me, there will also be those incredible breakthroughs, those aha moments, and that sense of accomplishment you get when you finally nail a new grammar concept or can hold a conversation with someone in their native language. Well, there's really nothing quite like it.
So true. It's a journey of self-discovery, of pushing past those comfort zones, and of expanding your world in ways you never even imagined. Well, on that inspiring note, thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the incredible world of language learning. We hope you're feeling energized and ready to take your English skills to the next level. And remember, the best time to start is always now. Until next time, keep those brains buzzing and those language skills soaring.